Alright, everybody, what's going on? It's your boy T, coming back at you again with another installment. Today's topic: what is capitalism? Now, what is capitalism? Now, a lot of people in politics like to use this term capitalism and don't necessarily give us a clear and valid understanding or description of what capitalism genuinely is. Majority of the people walking around in this country would hear the word capitalism, and the first thing that comes to mind is greed. So, is capitalism really about greed? Or is it about something else? Let's find out. Today I am using Investopedia. Investopedia is a nice little source I like to use. But now, to the topic, what is capitalism? By definition, capitalism is an economic system in which private individuals or corporations own capital goods, i.e., factories, raw materials, the means of production. The production of goods and services is then based on supply and demand in the general market, known as a market economy, rather than through central planning, known as a planned economy or command economy. Alright, now let's stop. So now it's a few key things we just read. Now, if you watched my last video where I went into socialism, you would see that these two, socialism and capitalism, are two ideologies or two economic systems that conflict with each other. So basically, with socialism, you have what's called state ownership. With capitalism, you have what's called private ownership. Now, the private ownership is basically built up of citizens, private individuals, or corporations, private corporations. And these people own the means of production. Now, as read, the production of goods and services is then based on supply and demand, which is like a barter system. You have some eggs, I have some gloves. You need to keep your hands warm. I need to eat, so we trade. Supply and demand. In the general market, known as a market economy. So now, what is a market economy? A market economy at face value is basically a free market system. And capitalism relies on a free market system rather than through central planning, known as a planned economy or command economy. Now, this is not a free market system. It is, as it reads, a planned economy. So now let's see the definitions of what these actually are. What is a market economy? A market economy is an economic system in which economic decisions and the prices of goods and services are guided by the interactions of a country's individual citizens and businesses. There may be some government intervention or central planning, but usually this term refers to an economy that is more market-oriented in general. So what is this saying? Basically, as I said before, a market economy is where the citizens or the private individuals determine prices, they determine their own investments, they determine how much they pay people if they employ people, and usually it's a system where people agree upon things. And this is in opposition to what is called a command economy or a planned economy. Now, a command economy is an economy. Sorry, let me read this. A command economy is a system where the government, rather than the free market or the private individual or the private sector, determines what goods should be produced, how much should be produced, and the price at which the goods are offered for sale. It also determines investments and incomes. So now, as I said before, this here would be socialism, a planned economy where the government, they make the investments in corporations, they make the investments into all other type of businesses, assets. Um, they own the means of production, and they also distribute these goods. They determine how much should be produced. That is a command or planned economy. So now back to what is capitalism. So capitalism in a nutshell is basically a system that's opposed to state ownership. Capitalism is against state ownership. Well, I wouldn't say completely against state ownership, because as we read, in a market economy, there may be some government intervention or central planning. Now, if you remember in my last video, where I went into how America is a constitutional federal republic. So now, some of our marketed economy would have to be, planned, so to say. That's why the definition reads how it reads. There may be some government intervention or central planning. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's not a market economy. These are just things that, for example, as a democracy automatically happens, because we need a middleman when it come down to the federal, when it come down to the federation, when it come down to all 50 states. We need some type of agreement when it comes down to finances. We can't just have it as what's called a confederacy, where you have each state doing their own thing, and then, but that's another topic. I'll make a video about that. So now I'm gonna get a little more into this capitalism real quick, and then I want to show you guys some graphs so you can see exactly what capitalism has done for the world and why I personally believe capitalism is good. Now, private property. The right to private property is a central tenet of capitalism. So now, this right here, as I said, the right to private property, the right for private individuals to own things versus the government. That's the main aspect of capitalism. All right, let's continue on. Citizens cannot accumulate capital if they are not allowed to own anything. As I said, that's what capitalism is all about. If they fear the stuff they own can be easily stolen or confiscated, that will happen by government intervention, like for example, eminent domain, but I'll make a video about that. Or if they cannot freely buy or sell the things they own, typo there, on their behalf, they should have me working for them. But anyway, or if they cannot freely buy or sell the things they own and transfer that ownership to others. As long as the owner stays within the parameters of the law, which generally are broad in capitalist systems, he or she may do what he wants with the property they own. I must say they because it says he or she. So now again, as I said earlier, capitalism is in opposition to socialism because capitalism is more so about private ownership. For example, I wake up, I have enough money, I make an investment, I buy a store, I sell goods in my store. Am I greedy because I am selling goods to people and making a profit. Now, I wouldn't make a profit if those things were not in demand. If people didn't want the things that I produced, they could simply go somewhere else and spend their money and I would make no profit. So in turn, I would have to actually supply what the people want in order for me to gain the capital that I desire. Where is the greed in that? Let's continue reading. A private citizen may purchase property from another private citizen at a price that is mutually agreed upon and not dictated by a government. So now this is, as said, this is another aspect, one of the main aspects of capitalism. The ability to privately exchange goods and services without being dictated by government. Why should anyone have to go through government in order to provide goods and services if people want them? And this is the basis of capitalism, to provide goods and services for capital gain. In a capitalist system, the free market forces, let me read that back. In a capitalist system, the free market forces of supply and demand, rather than a central governing body, set the prices at which property is bought and sold. So now you have to think about this for a second. In a capitalist system where people are privately dealing with each other, the free market forces of supply and demand, meaning that I have something you want, you have something I want, rather than a central governing body, meaning the government coming down with a command or plan economy where they force certain prices to be a certain thing. In a capitalist system, we set those prices through supply and demand. So now let's say in a market society, you have, no, sorry, not a market, let's say in a command economy or something that's government orchestrated. They set the prices, they set how much of it is needed to be, no, not needed, but they set the prices and they set the amount to be produced. Now, this is all done without the free market forces of supply and demand. So in a planned economy or in a socialist economy, how do you know which goods and services are actually in demand? I'll do a video about that later. So let's continue on reading. Private property rights are an important foundation of capitalist production. These rights clearly separate the ownership of the means of production from the workers who use them. For instance, an entrepreneur will own the factory and the machines used in it, as well as the finished product. A worker located inside of that factory and using those machines has no ownership of them and cannot take home with them. Come on, man, these guys is doing bad. And that's the thing. I'm reading this, man. Come on, man. Investopedia, y'all gotta do better. I'm here because I gotta give these people some information. Y'all got all these typos in here, man. But anyway, and cannot take home with them the finished product for personal use or sell. That would be considered theft. The worker is only entitled to their wages in return for their labor. So now, that right there, that kind of like, would leave a bad, taste in somebody's mouth because the way they worded that. But I would have to say in a socialist society, you can't do that neither. You can't just take home with you the finished product. That's not what happens in a socialist society. In a socialist society, or as we read, in a command, the government decides who distribute everything. See, they probably had a socialist. They probably had a socialist writing this. Had to be a little honest, but then throwing that at the bottom. Like, come on, man. But anyway, but yeah. So now that's basically a rough understanding of what capitalism is. It's not that much to get into, to be honest with you. It's very simple of what capitalism is. It's supply and demand. You know, you have something I want. We both come to a mutual agreement on how much we're willing to give up for it or how much we're willing to receive for it. And there's no foul play. Also, when it comes to the business aspect. Now, as it says, an entrepreneur will own the factory and the machines used in it, as well as the finished product. Now, of course, you know, people will look at in the capitalist society, the worker, he gets a wage that's not all that great or whatever have you. But at the same time, I mean, it's for the the entrepreneur is going into business for profit. The entrepreneur most of the time is investing their own money, or if they had taken out a loan or whatever, but they are going into business to make a profit. So of course, the worker will not be getting paid exactly what the finished product is worth, because there's other aspects of running a business, having workers, paying taxes, and yada yada yada. So everything works itself out. You get a wage, and the owner, they keep the rest of the money. Now, this is where people like to say that capitalism is based on greed. But is it really greed? Because now the entrepreneur not only supplied the factory, the machines to use it, they are paying you. And the whole reason of them becoming an entrepreneur, getting a factory, getting machines, and also the raw material for the finished product, which all costs money, is so that they could provide a service or some goods to other people, which includes the worker. Now, how is this greed? How can this be seen as greed? I wonder sometimes. Now, let's look at how this so-called greed actually affected the world. As a matter of fact, before we get into that, I want to give y'all some examples real quick, because I got some graphs I want y'all to see. But now let's go back to market economy and command economy, right? So now I want to give you guys a good example of what happens when you have a market economy. Or as a matter of fact, not even that. I want to give you guys a good example of what happens when the government, through a market economy or through a planned economy or a command economy, is the one doing the investments versus the private individual. So now, when a private individual, for example, starts up a business, right? They're using their own resources. They're not using taxpayer dollars. They're using either money that they worked hard for or money that they received through generational wealth. Now when a planned or command economy, the finances is either built up from taxation or from borrowing money from the central bank, which is the Federal Reserve. I'll make a video in the future about the Federal Reserve and how they operate. But in a nutshell, just to give you a quick understanding, when they, meaning the government, whenever they take money from the central bank, it comes with basically with the invisible tax called inflation, and with the inflation that we have today, which is about 2%, they say it devaluates the spending power of the private sector or the private individual. This in turns give the central banks power over the people through this imaginary, well, not imaginary, but through this invisible tax that I like to call it, well, as I call it, an invisible tax, inflation. So now I want to give y'all, like I said, I want to give y'all a little history lesson real quick. I'm not going to be too long-winded with this. The race for flight. The story of Samuel Langley and his great aerodrome. So now, I'm not sure if many of you people know exactly who Samuel Langley is, but he was basically in competition with the Wright brothers, and we're going to read about that real quick. All right. A century ago, the Wright brothers were working hard to develop the first manned flying machine. They weren't the only ones. Over the next months, Weekend Edition Sunday will present a series of profiles on the main rivals to the Wright brothers in the race for flight. Cool. So now, the Wright brothers, I'm sure, well, I would hope many of you people know who the Wright brothers was, especially if you like traveling around the world. The Wright brothers were the first people to create a manned flying machine. They are the founders of the airplane. These people, these brothers, were private individuals. They weren't funded by the government. And they were the first ones to successfully make a man-operated flying machine. So now, who is this Samuel Langley? Now, as read, the most prominent competitor and the only one with government funding was Secretary of the Smithsonian, Samuel Pierpont Langley. I don't know if I said his middle name right, but I don't care. So now Samuel Langley, this man was funded by the central banks or the government. It was planned economy or command economy. Now, I'm not gonna go too much into this. If you want, you could go read up on these people yourself on your own time. But I'm just gonna use them as an example of when the government decides to want to invest our money versus when private individuals invest their money for the innovation of our future. As I said, the Wright brothers, I don't know too much about them guys. I don't know too much about where their wealth came from. But one thing I do know is that they were not funded by the government. That means that they were not getting funded by our tax dollars. Think about that for a minute when you think about innovation. Who do you want making those type of investments? Do you want private individuals like the Wright brothers? Or would you want the government to use tax dollars or possibly money from the central bank, which would cause inflation, so that they could get guys like Samuel Langley, who failed horribly? Think about that for a moment. So now I also want to show you guys this little graph, right? Now look at this. World population living in extreme poverty, 1820s to 2015. Do you see these numbers? I'll just give you guys a second to look at that. Do you see these numbers of the world population living in extreme poverty since the 1820s? Do you want to know what this have to do in common with the rise of capitalism? I'll tell you right now. You're about to go to the Library of Congress And that was the industrial age. Let me do a little quick reading real quick, and then we're going to jump back to that graph. In the decades following the Civil War, which was in the 1800s, the United States emerged as an industrial giant. Old industries expanded and many new ones, including petroleum refining, steel manufacturing, and electrical power emerged. Railroads expanded significantly, bringing bringing even remote parts of the country into a national market economy. Let's read that again. Where I want to start from. Railroads expanded significantly, bringing even remote parts of the country into a national market economy. Market economy. Hold on. Why are we down there? Market economy, the private individuals, the Wright brothers. These were the innovators of that time in America. Real quick, let's jump back to that graph. So now, when we look at this graph, the 1820s to the 1850s. Now, from the 1850s to the 1900s. And now we slowly see a rise, of people living in extreme poverty still. But then we see a sharp decline with a sharp incline of people not in poverty. Why is that? Because of capitalism. Innovation. When you give people the means of their own production instead of having it ran by government, which a lot of the world did before the 1800s. Majority of the world, well, I wouldn't say majority, but a good portion of the world were in a socialist state, so to say. When America came out as the industrial giant, we basically created the new world, We basically created a whole new society, a whole new system of how to operate. Numbers don't lie. I mean, that's what Hope said, right? Men lie, women lie, numbers don't. Capitalism drove the world out of poverty. Not socialism, capitalism. So the next time you think about if a capitalist is a greedy person, think about this little chart right here. Think about this. The industrial age is what brought the world out of poverty through a market economy. All right, I'm gonna wrap this one up. You guys can see all the sources I use if you want to go and read more into these things. You can do that. But I'm signing out. Got a couple more videos to make. I'll be working hard today. So again, but it's capitalism. In a nutshell, capitalism is private ownership. The free market system. The private sector having power. The private individual owning their means of production. And then once private individuals produce things and give people jobs through innovation, the people that work for them can in turn invest their money. And if they play their cards right and make good investments, they themselves can be the next innovator. Alright, so that's gonna be the end of this video. Catch y'all next time.